The bus stop bench was already crowded with noise and movement when the question arrived, small and trembling, cutting through the afternoon heat like a fragile note of hope asking permission to exist. A one-legged girl stood there, balancing on worn crutches, sunlight catching the metal and reflecting into tired eyes that had learned too early how heavy the world could be. The single father sitting on the bench looked up at her, carrying burdens of his own, unaware that his next choice would change both of their lives forever. If you believe that kindness, second chances, and quiet human decency still matter in this world, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel, Kindness Corner, because stories like this remind us who we really are. Ethan Cole had not planned to sit at that bus stop longer than necessary. The afternoon sun was high, bright, and unforgiving, the kind of day where shadows felt like mercy and every sound echoed too loudly. He had finished his morning shift at a construction site, dust still clinging to his boots and the smell of sweat and cement following him like a second skin. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion, not just physical but emotional, the kind that never quite went away after his wife passed 3 years earlier. Being a single dad had turned every ordinary task into a quiet act of survival. He checked his watch, thinking of his son waiting at home, thinking of groceries he still needed to buy, thinking of bills stacked on the kitchen counter like silent judges. The bench beneath him was chipped and faded, its paint peeling like old scars. People came and went, some impatient, some lost in their phones, some staring into the distance with eyes full of stories no one would ever ask about. Ethan sat there trying not to think, trying to rest for just a few minutes before the next responsibility called his name. That was when he noticed her shadow fall across the pavement, thin and hesitant, like she wasn't sure she deserved space in the light. The girl could not have been more than 11 or 12. Her hair was tied back neatly, though strands escaped and clung to her forehead from the heat. One leg was missing below the knee, replaced by a worn prosthetic that didn't quite fit right, forcing her to lean heavily on her crutches. Her backpack looked too big for her small frame, tugging her shoulders down as if reminding her constantly of what she carried. She stood near the bench for a moment, watching the people sitting there, measuring each face with cautious hope and practiced disappointment. Ethan felt her presence before he fully looked at her. When he did, their eyes met, and something in her expression made his chest tighten. It wasn't just shyness or fear, it was the familiar look of someone who had learned to ask carefully because rejection came too easily. Without saying a word out loud, she indicated the small space beside him on the bench, her question clear even without sound. The bench wasn't full, but people had a way of making space feel forbidden when difference entered the picture. Ethan shifted immediately, moving his bag from the bench and straightening his posture to make room. He nodded gently, offering the space without hesitation. The girl's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked like she might cry right there, overwhelmed by the simplicity of being welcomed. She moved slowly, carefully, settling beside him with effort, adjusting her crutches so they wouldn't bother anyone. Ethan noticed how she apologized with her body, shrinking herself as if trying to become invisible. As she sat, a breeze passed through, rustling nearby trees and carrying the sounds of traffic and distant laughter. The world went on, indifferent and loud, but something quiet and sacred unfolded on that bench. Ethan glanced at the girl from the corner of his eye, noticing the way her hands trembled slightly, the way she stared straight ahead as if afraid to take up too much attention. He recognized that look because he had worn it himself after losing his wife, when grief made him feel like a burden everywhere he went. The girl's name was Mira, though Ethan didn't know it yet. She lived a few stops away, taking the bus home from a rehabilitation center where she spent her afternoons learning to walk better with her prosthetic. She had lost her leg in a daytime accident 2 years earlier, a careless driver, a sudden impact, a life split into before and after under the bright sun of an ordinary morning. Since then, her world had become smaller, shaped by stares, whispers, and people who spoke to her with pity instead of respect. Sitting had become one of the simplest yet hardest things, because benches were often full of people unwilling to shift, unwilling to see her. As they waited, Ethan noticed Myra's backpack strap slipping down her shoulder. Without thinking, he gently adjusted his own bag to give her more space. The gesture was small, but Mira felt it like a wave breaking against a wall she had built around her heart. She had expected tolerance at best, annoyance at worst. What she received instead was quiet consideration, the kind that didn't demand gratitude or acknowledgement. Minutes passed. The sun shifted, casting long, warm lines across the pavement. Ethan checked his phone, then put it away, feeling strangely present in a moment he hadn't planned. He thought about his son, Jonah, who was 8 years old and missing his front teeth, who asked questions about fairness and loss that Ethan didn't always know how to answer. He imagined Jonah sitting next to this girl, imagined how easily children could be kind when adults didn't teach them fear. Mira adjusted her crutches again, her face tightening with discomfort. Ethan noticed immediately. He stood up slightly, repositioning himself to make the bench more comfortable for her. He offered his jacket folded under her side, using gestures rather than words, not wanting to embarrass her. Mira hesitated, then accepted, her hands brushing the fabric as if touching something fragile. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over despite her efforts to hold them back. She turned her face away, ashamed of the sudden emotion, but Ethan pretended not to notice, giving her dignity in her vulnerability. For Mira, this moment broke something open. She had been strong for so long, brave in therapy rooms, polite in public, quiet when people stared. She had learned to swallow pain and gratitude alike, to keep moving forward no matter how heavy each step felt. But this simple acceptance, this unspoken message that she belonged here as much as anyone else, overwhelmed her defenses. The tears were not just sadness. They were relief, gratitude, and the aching hope that maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it sometimes seemed. The bus arrived eventually, its brakes hissing, doors opening wide under the bright sky. People stood, shuffled, rushed forward. Ethan instinctively positioned himself slightly in front of Mira, creating space so she could board safely without being jostled. He held out a steady arm when she needed balance, careful not to draw attention, just being there. Mira boarded with care, finding a seat near the front. Ethan followed, sitting nearby, making sure she was settled before turning his gaze back to the window. The ride was short but meaningful. Sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Mira watched the city pass by, her reflection faintly visible, her expression softer now. Ethan thought about how easily lives intersected, how a single decision could ripple outward in ways unseen. He thought about his wife, about how she used to say that kindness was never wasted, even when it felt small. When the bus reached Myra's stop, she rose slowly, steadying herself. Before stepping off, she turned back toward Ethan, her eyes shining. She pressed a small folded piece of paper into his hand, then moved carefully down the aisle. Ethan opened it after she left, reading the shaky handwriting that simply said, "Thank you for letting me sit and making me feel normal today." He closed his eyes, emotion tightening his throat, realizing that his answer to a simple question had carried more weight than he could have imagined. As the bus continued on, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. He arrived home to his son with a story not of hardship, but of connection. He told Jonah about the girl at the bus stop, about how sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is ask, and the kindest thing another can do is say yes. Jonah listened wide-eyed, absorbing the lesson not as a lecture, but as truth lived out in daylight. Days later, Ethan saw Mira again at the same bus stop, this time sitting confidently on the bench before he arrived. She smiled when she saw him, her posture stronger, her presence more assured. They shared the space easily, like old friends bound by a moment neither would forget. The world around them remained imperfect, loud, and often unkind, but something had shifted, something permanent and good. If this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you of the power of small, human choices made in the light of an ordinary day, please take a moment now to like, comment, share, and support this video. Your engagement helps stories like this reach others who might need hope today. Before this story ends, we have one special request for you. Please comment the word kindness below and share what this story made you feel, because your words might become the reason someone else believes in humanity again. The bus stop returned to its usual rhythm, people coming and going, sunlight moving across the pavement, life unfolding one moment at a time. But for Ethan and Mira, that bench would always hold more than chipped paint and worn wood. It held proof that even in a world full of reasons to look away, choosing to make space for someone could change everything.